Hi everyone, welcome to session 5 of Mastering Digital Photography, organized by the IIT Madras Alumni Association Photo Club. My name is Praveen Ramanathan, and in this session,
things will ease up between India and Bharat. Abito was going through a very bad phase, but now people have started going and coming. So earlier it became a situation if you came, you couldn't go back.
Priya,
Yeah,
can you?
if you could mute it.
Yeah, I'm muting.
Okay. Yeah, if you could mute people who are coming in, that will help.
Yeah, okay.
So in this session, we look at a few things and techniques how you can use the manual mode and how it allows you to explore the full potential of your DSLR or mirrorless camera. We'll go over a few techniques and applications, starting with the bulb mode and then ending with some information about filters. So we'll go over bulb. I'll talk about how you can take time lapses. We look at exposure bracketing, focus stacking, and also multiple exposure, in-camera multiple exposures as well. So a quick introduction. I'm a landscape photographer based in Bay Area, California, and have been exploring portrait and event photography for the past few years. For the longest time, I've been a Nikon user, but I've also started using the Sony A7R system for event photography. And through the course of my photography journey, I have owned multiple DSLRs, mirrorless cameras, and lenses. Right. Okay. Manual mode, right? So moving from your auto to manual mode is the biggest step forward towards mastering your photography and using your tool. So it transforms your camera from just an electronic device into a creative tool, right? So why should you use the manual mode, right? Because manual mode gives you complete control over the exposure triangle. So we covered this in our session 2, where we talked about aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. So by using manual mode, you decide the balance and not the camera's algorithm, right? And by manually setting your aperture, which is your f-stop, you control exactly how much of the background is blurred or sharp. So this is your depth of field. You control your depth of field. You choose whether to freeze a bird in flight at 1/4000th of a second or create a silky waterfall effect with a long exposure. That's you control your motion. In changing or tricky lighting, manual mode actually prevents the camera from guessing and changing the exposures between every shot. And we look at this, why this is very important in some applications. Now, for some, shooting in manual mode encourages shooting in RAW format. This provides the maximum amount of data for post-processing and dynamic range recovery after you shoot. Now, there are photographers who don't like shooting in RAW, actually, who shun shooting in RAW and post-processing the pictures. They prefer using the photo as shot in the camera or doing very light touches, like maybe crop the image a little bit here and there. But in my opinion, RAW format can be really powerful for landscape and event photographers. I personally shoot in RAW all the time, and I love the flexibility that it gives me after the photo is taken, because it allows me to focus more on the moment than on the camera settings. So I'm not worrying about have I set my highlights correctly, have I set my shadows correctly, is my contrast okay? So it gives me a little bit more flexibility after I take the picture to come back home and then take a look at it and not miss the moment. But irrespective of whether you shoot in RAW or not, shooting in manual mode transforms you from a casual observer into an artist, kind of, I would say, quote unquote artist, who can control how the moment is captured, right? It just opens up your imagination. So let's look at what is this bulb mode, right? The term bulb refers to this rubber pneumatic squeeze bulb that was attached to the camera shutters in the late 18th and 19th centuries. Right? So when the photographer squeezed the bulb, the air pressure would mechanically push the shutter open, and it would stay open as long as they kept the bulb squeezed, and would snap shut when the moment they let it go. So bulb mode is a special manual setting that allows the shutter to remain open for as long as you hold the shutter release button pressed, right? So the standard shutter priority mode in most cameras caps off at 30 seconds. But this bulb mode grants you unlimited, I would say unlimited, at least much longer exposure time for capturing extremely low light. And it is actually the gold standard for long exposure photography, such as if you want to capture trails of stars, silky waterfalls, or vibrant firework displays kind of thing, right? So let's take a quick look at how you can get into this bulb mode and how you can operate your camera into this bulb mode. Okay, let me stop sharing and let's go to the live demo. So how do you get to your bulb setting? So if you look at this number here, that's my shutter speed. So I put my camera in the manual mode here. You can see it's in M, and then I start increasing my shutter or decreasing my shutter speed. So increasing my exposure time. You can see this number is increasing.
Not able to see your camera.
You're not able to see my video?
We are able to
We
see
only
you,
see you. Yeah.
but not your
I
camera.
see.
I think
Okay, so how about now?
Your picture.
Priya, if you could pin Praveen's iPhone for everybody, I think that will help.
Yeah. Let me know once you can see my phone, my camera setup.
I think it should be visible for everyone right now.
Okay, let me just reiterate here for a second. Okay, so you can see I've put my camera in manual mode. It's an M, and this number here controls the shutter speed. You can see my shutter speed right now is at 1.6 seconds. So if I keep increasing my exposure time, you see this number is increasing from 1.3 seconds to 8 seconds. And if I go to 30 seconds, if I increase it beyond 30 seconds, you'll see it says bulb.
Sorry, we're still able to see your image only. We're not seeing the live video of the camera.
Priya, if you don't mind, put that Praveen's iPhone as spotlight for everyone.
Can everyone see now?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. So as I dialed in more exposure time, you can see the camera now says bulb here. Right? So now we are in bulb mode. So if I move my finger, you will be able to see my finger pressing the shutter button. So if I press down my shutter button, the camera will start exposing for however long I keep the shutter button pressed. So I'm going to press it now and then remove it up. So that's the amount of exposure that it's bright right now, but I just want to show you that's what it is. So if I want to show you the exposure, I'm going to change the aperture to show you a little bit more exposure. So let's say I am at f18 right now, so I keep the shutter button pressed for, like, let's say approximately a second. That's how almost 1 second exposure looks like. Now let's say I can keep the shutter button pressed, and I'm going to count to 3. 1, 2, 3. And now that's how the exposure looks like. I'm going to count till 7 to show you how the exposure will look like if I keep it pressed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, and you can see that's the exposure. So this is a approximately 7 second exposure. This is a 3 second exposure. This is a 1 second exposure. So bulb gives you the ability to control your exposure time, and you can make it variable. You don't have to keep changing from 1 to 3 to 7 manually every time. And more than that, it actually gives you partial exposure times as well. So if depending on how long you keep the button pressed, it can even, some cameras will let you shoot for like 2.5 seconds, something like that, right? So that's what bulb gives you. So bulb, you have to keep the shutter button pressed, and as long as you keep the shutter button pressed, it'll take the exposure. Now this is obviously, this works, but it's not optimal, because every time you press, you touch the camera, you transfer some amount of shake into the camera, right? And camera shake especially affects your long exposure a lot more than short exposure. So you'll be able to see vibrations a lot more when you have long exposures. So there is a recommended accessory that I would recommend, and that is called a intervalometer. If you can see, let me put it right here. This is called an intervalometer, or a shutter release. This is an accessory that I will highly recommend if you want to if you want to take any long exposure photographs. So this shutter release gives you the ability to control your camera through a cable like this. So you can just connect your shutter release to your camera and then put it into the bulb mode, and now you can see that once I start, if I click this, it's taking pictures, and I can see exactly how long I'm counting here, and I don't have to keep the button pressed. It takes care of, and I can leave the camera counting towards that. So this is called an intervalometer, or a cable shutter release, and this is a very important accessory to take pictures in bulb mode. Okay. All right. So let's go back to the presentation. Are you able to see the slide now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So here are some common applications where bulb mode is essential, actually. First is astrophotography or star trails, because stars are relatively dim. A standard 30-second exposure often is not sufficient to capture their movement or their brightness. By leaving the shutter open for a few minutes, depending on how dark they are, how bright they are, the conditions, you will have to expose it for, let's say, 1 minute to 5 minutes. You can actually capture the rotation of the Earth as the stars create these stunning circular star trails across the sky. I have a picture showing that on the right. The second application is definitely fireworks. because fireworks are so unpredictable, right? Every fireworks takes its own time. You don't know when it's going to burst. You can actually see it being fired, but you don't know exactly how long it's going to take. So bulb mode gives you that flexibility to have this variable exposure from anywhere from 2 to 10 seconds, right? You don't know when the strike will happen, so you can look at what's happening and then trigger the shutter open as you track the firework. Another application is light painting. This is the process of using some handheld light source, maybe like a flashlight or an LED band or something like that, and you can draw in a dark room or dark space in a landscape. And bulb mode gives you the time to walk around and complete these drawings. But otherwise it'll not be easy to do it with a standard timed setting, right? So, and I have an example of a light painting that I did a really long time ago. This is an example of how you can use your bulb mode for that as well. And of course, you always have your silky water, moving clouds, any type of long exposure. You can use bulb mode to make water look like mist or clouds and look like streaks of paint. All these any of these long exposure applications you can use bulb mode for, right? Where you need variable exposure times. Now, bulb mode comes with its own problems. Digital sensors, they face a physical limit, which is heat and therefore noise. So when a sensor stays active for a long duration in bulb mode, the pixels begin to heat up, creating what is called a dark current, or it's also called long exposure noise. So as the sensor heats up, the noise starts to compete with the actual light signal from your image. And this leads to what are called hot pixels. So hot pixels is like, you may see these bright red, green, or sometimes blue dots that appear in your darker areas of your photo. But are actually not there. It is noise, but it's because the pixels are heating up, right? Now, the camera gives you a solution. It's called long exposure noise reduction, and this is the camera's built-in mechanism against the noise. And how does it work? If you enable this setting in your camera, the camera, after it takes your picture, your long exposure picture, it will immediately take a second exposure of the exact same length, but with the shutter closed. So it actually takes a black picture, and then it identifies what are all the heat induced noises that are there in the dark frame, and then digitally subtracts it from your actual photo. So that's how it does the long exposure noise reduction. Now, the pros is that it's very effective in removing those hot pixels, because it's very random. It's not like ISO noise. It's a different type of noise than ISO noise. ISO noise is more like algorithmic, because every pixel has the same sensitivity, so ISO noise is more predictable. Hot pixel noise or noise from bulb mode is not very predictable for softwares. And the best thing is that it saves a lot of time in post-processing, so you don't have to worry about taking this through some software to remove the long exposure noise. But this noise reduction is actually a double-edged sword, because what happens is it actually doubles the time between captures. So if you take a 5-minute photo, it will take another 5 minutes, so a total of 10 minutes to actually finish processing one picture. And the camera also stays active as long, which means it can be critical for battery life of your camera, especially in cold weather if you're taking night photography and astrophotography and all that. But for me, the most important thing is that there will be missed moments. So it means because you cannot take another photo while the camera is busy processing the dark frame. So if you know that you're only capturing a few set of photos, and you know that the time between the two exposures is okay with you, that you don't miss anything, then enabling long exposure noise reduction works really well. Okay. All right. let's move to the next application, which is the time-lapse. Now, time-lapse is, I think, a very fairly common term now. Everyone should know what a time-lapse is. It's a technique where the frequency at which you take the photos is much lower than the frequency used to view the photos. So when you play them at normal speed, it appears that the time is moving faster. Thus it's called time-lapse, because it moves faster. It's essentially the opposite of slow motion. Right? Slow motion is when you take a picture at normal speed and play and slow it down. Time-lapse is you speed it up. So let's say if you take a photo every minute and then you play them back at 30 frames per second, then a whole day of activity is compressed into, let's say, a few seconds, maybe 1 or 2 minutes of video. Now, planning a time lapse. So I'm going to go over how to plan a time lapse because that involves a bunch of math. So first thing is that you need to figure out two things. One, how long do you want your time lapse to be? And second is what kind of frame rate you want to use for your time lapse. And these two together will give you what is called the golden formula, which is the total number of photos that you need to take. So if you want a cinematic look, then you would go for like 24 frames per second. Most cinematic video is at 24 frames per second. Anything on your computer, on your phone, on your web, like YouTube, it's mostly, sometimes it's 30 frames per second. 60 frames per second we typically don't use for time lapses because you actually want to, it's more for slow motion. So you take something in 60 frames per second and then slow it down in normal speed. So once you decide these two, what frame rate you want to use for your video and then how many seconds or minutes you want to have your duration, that gives you a total number of photos. Once you know how many photos you need, you have to decide how much real time or shooting time you have to compress. And then what decides is the interval, the time between each shot. So you're not taking shot every second or every millisecond or something. You have to decide what interval, and this is the very important one in time lapses. How do you decide what is the right interval for the scene that you're shooting time lapses for, right? So typical suggested, these are all suggestions. Again, it depends on that particular situation. But if you're shooting fast action like clouds or like fast moving crowds, then about 2 to 5 seconds will give you a nice kind of nice interval, and otherwise it will be too stuttery. If it's a slow action like the moving movement of sun, moons, or stars, you can increase the interval to about maybe a minute. You can take pictures every minute. But if there's an extremely slow motion, like you're trying to capture plant growth over days, then even like once in 5 minutes should be good, right? So all these, so your interval and your desired video duration and your frame rate, all these 2-3 things together determine your total shooting time, right? So the total shooting time, so let's say you want to take a 30-second video at 24 frames per second. That means you have to shoot for 720 photos. And let's say you're shooting moving a landscape that's moving clouds. Let's say you give a 5-second interval. It is about 3,600 photos. Oh, sorry, 3,600 seconds, my bad. Which means 1 hour. So if you take pictures for 1 hour at 24 frames per second and 5-second interval, you will get a 30-second video. That's how you calculate this, right? And the higher the frame rate or the higher the interval, the longer the shooting time, which means you are pretty much stuck at that place for 1 hour or more, for how much ever is the shooting time for, right? This is the math behind time-lapse sequences. Now, how do you prepare for, and what are some of the precautions that you need to take for when you take time lapses, right? Obviously, always use the manual mode to fix the exposure triangle. You lock in your white balance, don't use auto white balance. Focus, you set your camera to manual focus and manual exposure, right? If you leave the camera in shutter priority or aperture priority, it will result in a flicker due to small changes in light, and I'll talk about it a little bit more. Now, every camera has a mechanical shutter that's rated for a specific lifespan, like usually 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 shots. And with all of these time lapses, you're taking many pictures. And also with longer shutter speed, sometimes you want to keep the shutter speed you take 1 second or 2 second exposures to smoothen the exposure. Mechanical shutter can introduce vibrations. When the mirror kind of slaps, opens or shut, it's called micro vibrations, and that can actually affect the quality of your picture. So usually you would turn on so in your shutter mode, you will see that there is an exposure delay, which means you can set a 1 to 2 second exposure delay. So you press the shutter and then the picture will only be taken after a 2 second delay. Then that means that the mirror would have come up and the vibrations would have settled down, and then the picture is exposed. Account this for your interval as well. So if you are adding exposure delay for every picture, you have to account for this in your interval. But then the solution is using the electronic shutter, meaning there is zero mechanical wear and tear and zero vibration involved. But electronic shutters don't usually work in all situations, so they come with their own set of problems, so just be aware of that. Right. So in time lapses, flicker is actually a big problem. So flicker is, let's say you have a tube light or a bulb at your home, and it's at its end of life. You see how it kind of flickers. It doesn't give you a constant light. So in time lapses, flicker is very common, and it's the stuttering brightness between frames. It's a change in brightness between frames. And because you're viewing the frames so fast, you'll actually be able to see that you'll be able to make that change in light. And this often happens because the SLR's aperture blades, they open and close for almost every shot, and they never land in exactly the same spot twice. There'll be these micro differences. So if your composition allows, then shoot at your lens's widest aperture, which is like f2. If your lens opens up at f2.8, set your aperture at f2.8. And it removes this issue because the blades always open. You don't have to go to a smaller aperture. So try to use your widest aperture to at least avoid some flickering. On a DSLR, light can leak through the viewfinder because the viewfinder is actually open always. It's not an electronic viewfinder like on mirrorless. Light can leak through the viewfinder, and it can affect your long exposure during the daytime, especially during the daytime. So some SLRs like the D800, D850s, they have a button to press where you can close there's a built-in shutter, there's a built-in thing to close the viewfinder. Otherwise, you need to get a little plastic clip or tape to cover your viewfinder. Now, you might think this is not usually a problem, but trust me, this is a real issue when you're shooting time lapses in bright light. But again, with mirrorless cameras, this is not a problem because we use electronic viewfinders. And while you're shooting time lapses, I didn't mention this, but it's very obvious, you will most likely put your camera on a tripod or in a stable position somewhere. When you do this, make sure that you turn off the vibration reduction, because vibration reduction, if it's on a tripod, can actually create micro shakes because the lens is trying to find movement that's not there. So it will actually try to compensate, anticipating movement, but it won't be there. So make sure you turn off your VR or vibration reduction option there. So actually now I want to show a sample time lapse that I took many years ago. I'm going to share my screen and let me know, and I think I'm going to turn off the audio because it might be tagged as a copyright violation. So let's see if you can. All right, can you see what I'm sharing? It should say Yosemite 2013. Are you able to see this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, so I'm going to play a video. This is a time-lapse sequence. This is a 2-minute video. It took me 2 days to shoot this in Yosemite back in 2013 and multiple locations. Let me just play this video. Unfortunately, I'm going to turn off the audio just so that there's no copyright for the music. Sorry. So and I want you to observe this particular time-lapse sequence where you can actually see the flicker more. It's very obvious in this particular sequence. Yeah, so in the second or third sequence, you'll be able to see. I have a link to this time-lapse sequence in the presentation, so you can watch it again. The time-lapse will be more dramatic with the music on. Yeah. Okay, so that's time lapses. And then let's take a look at another technique to capture that helps us capture the full range of light. That's called exposure bracketing. So the process here is it's a process of taking 3 or more shots of the same scene at different exposure levels. Typically, it consists of 1 standard exposure and 1 underexposed, which is dark, and 1 overexposed, which is bright picture. The goal is to ensure that at least 1 shot is perfectly exposed, and then combine them later for high dynamic range with your underexposed and your overexposed shot, right? So the underexposed shot, which is the dark shot, it preserves the details in the bright areas, which is the highlights. The overexposed shots, it pulls details out of the shadows. So shadows are typically the darker areas. It reveals the details out of the shadows. And then you have your standard shot, which captures all the midtones, which is neither too bright nor too dull. So here you can see I have a sequence here that I shot. This is also a pretty long time ago. There is a stream of water flowing, and there was bright light, but there was also shadows from the tree up above the stream. So there was a mix. It's a very high contrast scene because there were a lot of shadows and also bright spots coming from between the leaves and the trees. So I captured the one on the top is the overexposed, which is, you see, it's +1 exposure value. The second row is the standard exposure, which is at 0 EV. The third one is -1 stop, and that's the underexposed. So I captured these are as captured. The first column is as captured. The second column is a bit post-processed. So using Photoshop and Lightroom, I was able to recover some of the shadows and some of the highlights. And then once if I process it and then combine, I can go from, I look at the bottommost row, so I can go from the left to the right for the final image. So it almost looks like there were no big shadows or no big highlights. So you can use this exposure bracketing when you have these high. So when do you use it, right? You have this capability, but when do you use it? So you use it in very high contrast scenes. So example, you have sunsets, or you have some backlit portraits, or you have interiors with bright windows and you're taking pictures indoors. You will see that your windows, typically, if you don't take it in this exposure bracketing, it will look very bright because you're indoors, it's pretty dark. Or whenever there is some challenging lighting, so when the camera's light meter is fooled by let's say snow or deep shadows, then also you need to try exposure bracketing. Especially when you have just one chance to get the shot, but you're not sure what your best exposure is. This is another use case of taking exposure bracketing, because let's say it's just one chance that you get at taking the picture, you're not really sure if your current exposure is correct, then you would take a few overexposed and underexposed, and then later on you can pick the one that was right for the scene. Right. So as far as settings goes, I will show you a quick demo of this as well. So why don't we do that? So let's look at a quick demo for this one. So let's go back to my. So different cameras or different camera brands have different options. This is the Nikon camera, and then here in the Nikon camera it's called auto bracketing. So if I go inside auto bracketing, you can set how many shots you want to take. So for example, this one here, it says 0F. Right now it's a little bit not contrasty, but just bear with me. So I can say I want to take 3 shots or 5 shots or 0, or so I can say let's say I want to take 3 shots, 3 pictures, and then it's asking me how much do I want to increment the exposure by, right? So I can go all the way from 0.3 to 1, 2, and up to 3. So I can go all the way from 0.3 EV to 3 EV between my pictures. So again, this is something that there is no real math or anything. It just comes by trial and error. So you see how much dynamic range you need in your current scene, and then you dial in this picture. So I'm going to set, let's say, 3 number of shots with 1 EV increment. Okay. So now if I go back here and change my, let me change my, I'm going to come back to 1 second, make it a little bit, okay, all right. Okay, so here is my scene right now. I'm exposing it to just that. So now Now if I press my shutter button once, it's going to actually take 3 pictures. So let's see. Oh, where is that? Oh, sorry, I need to be in the here. Okay. Okay. And then press again. So you can see it's taking a longer one. Okay. Okay. So this is my underexposed. This is my standard exposure, and this is my overexposed. So it took 3 pictures automatically. So every time you click, so if you set it to 3 frames, so the first click would be your underexposed, second one would be your standard one, and then the third picture would be your overexposed. So that's how you set your camera into. And then once you take these 3 pictures, you'll have to bring them into your software to then do your HDR post-processing for this. So that's how it goes. Okay, let's jump back to the presentation. Okay, so the next technique that I want to talk about is focus stacking. Focus stacking is a fantastic way to achieve infinite depth of field, especially in macro photography or landscape photography, where a single shot just can't get everything in shot due to the lens limitations. So in session 2A, we showed that, or we talked about that increasing the f number increases the depth of field. So an f22 or an f32 will have a very wide depth of field. But these large f numbers have to deal with diffraction that makes the image soft, right? And in some situations, such as macro photography or in landscapes where you have an object close in the foreground, very close in the foreground, but you also want the mountains that are far away to be in focus, even these large f numbers are not sufficient to get everything in focus. So by taking a series of photos ranging from the closest point of the subject to the furthest, you can ensure every detail is captured in crisp focus. And then you have to bring it into a software, a specialized software like Photoshop, that analyzes the stack of images, and then it selects the sharpest pixels from each layer and then blends them into a final clear composite picture. So this allows landscape photographers or macro photographers to overcome the shallow focus of wide apertures, resulting in like really good images that appear sharp from front to back that are otherwise not possible in SLRs. Now, there are a few conditions when you can use focus stacking. So focus stacking is obviously when you don't have motion, you have very stationary images most of the time, or there might be minute movements in the clouds, but that's still okay. It's still within reasonable thing. Not lots of movement. If there's lots of movement, then focus stacking doesn't really help with that. So you need very still subjects. But then once you have a still subject, then you can use focus stacking. So it really comes in handy for landscape pictures, and then macro photography, where if your insect is not moving or you have a very tiny object, this is a stationary object, and you want to take a macro, that also should work. So how do you do this in your camera? So most cameras, they have a built-in feature called focus shift shooting, or sometimes it's also called focus bracketing in Sony. So this kind of automates the process of moving the focus points between the shots. So there are 2 settings that you can control, but finding the optimal settings involves a lot more trial and error than just math. The first setting is called a step width. The step width is nothing but a focus increment. So this refers to the distance that the focus point moves between each consecutive shot in your sequence. So think about it as a thickness of each slice, right? If your step is too large, you will have some kind of gaps between areas. But if the step size is too small, you will end up with hundreds of unnecessary photos to take that will take forever to go through and process. So what should you look at when you look at your step width? And the step width is, if you look in your camera, it will say choose a number between 1 and 10. That's it. It's not really something that tells you, gives you more information. So you have to look at your scene and look at your camera settings and then decide. So step width, it depends primarily on, I would say, three things. First is your aperture. So if you're using a wider aperture like f2.8, it means you have a very thin or very shallow depth of field, which means you will need finer step width. You'll need smaller step widths. But if you're using a narrow aperture like, let's say, f11, that creates a more deeper slice of focus, so which means you can use a larger step width. So that's the first thing, your aperture. You can look at your aperture to figure out your step width. The second is your magnification. So the closer you are to your subject, especially in macro photography, your depth of field is very shallow, which means it will require much smaller step. So smaller step width if you're looking at macro photography. But also it depends on your lens focal length. So the longer the telephoto, like if you're using very long lenses, the long lenses, the telephoto lenses usually have a shallower depth of field than wide angle lenses. So if you're using a very wide angle lens, usually wide angle lenses have a much larger depth of field. That means you have to use a finer step width. So use these kind of information to figure out how much step width you need to use. And then the second one is the camera. You can dial in how many shots, how many pictures you want. Some cameras can take up to a few hundred pictures at once. But let's say for a landscape with already a deeper depth of field, maybe a few shots might be enough. But maybe for a macro, for a bug in a very complex situations, you might need 50 to 100 shots. So let's take a look at how to do this on your camera. So the first thing I want to show you is that I have a scene here, and this scene here is actually, and I'm going to use f2.8 to show. Let's dial in the exposure. Okay. So if I zoom in here, you can actually see that at f2.8 I have things that are in focus, and then there are things that are out of focus because they are at different distances. Now if I want to show you, let me move this to a manual mode. So I'm changing this to a manual focus, and you can see the part. This is called focus peaking. We talked about this in our previous session, where you can see the camera can show you where it's actually focusing right now. So this is highlighting in red. So if I move my focus ring, you can see here that the focus is, you can see that the barcodes are turning red, and then you'll be able to see that the mammoth here, if I turn it a little bit more, you can see that's where the focus is right now. And you can see all the letters are in focus, and now if I change my focus a little bit more, you can see the number 2 is in focus, and then if I change a little bit more, the number 5 is in focus. So focus peaking, this is focus peaking. This is another feature that is there in your cameras, and this is where you can see now that there are different objects in this picture that are at different focus distances. So if I take just one picture, it's not going to give me a focus. So if I take this at 2.8, and let's say I go to f2.8 and I change my ISO to 400 just to get a better, faster shutter speed. Okay, so now if I take this picture, you can see that the mammoth is in focus, but the background and foreground are not in focus. So I can stop down all the way till f22, but then I have to increase my exposure time or my ISO, and then I can get a little bit of the things in focus. So even at, let's say I have this at f22 and I take a picture. This is a 6-second exposure. Okay, so it's a little bit overexposed, but you can see things are in focus, but are much better in focus. But then at f22, once you view this on your computer, you will see that the image is not very soft, and still the 5 to me is not sharp enough. The letter 2 is sharper, but the letter 5, the number 5 is not actually sharp. The block here is not sharp enough for f22. So we've pretty much hit the limit of the lens and the physics. So then what do I do? Okay, so now let's look at how to use focus shift shooting. So now let's say I set my aperture at f5.6, and then let's say I take increase my ISO so that I get a faster shutter speed for now, and then let's say we do something like this. Okay, so I'm going to also increase my f number so that, okay, all right, so we have dialed in some exposure. It looks okay to me for now. So first is, let's look at, so I'm moving the focus to the closest point that I have there, and then I go to focus shift shooting is not enabled because let me see, menu, okay, focus shift shooting. Oh, because auto exposure is on. So let me turn off my auto bracketing. So yeah, okay. So that's off. So then, so in Nikon there is an option called focus shift shooting. So you go into that menu, and here is where it'll say, okay, tell me how many shots do I need. So and then here's your focus step width, right? So you can set all the way from narrow all the way to wide, right? It's showing you that your step width is narrow. So typically around 3 to 4, depends on your scene. Again, this is something trial and error, so I'm going to set it to 4 for now, and then let's say I take 50 shots. Okay, and I have silent photography off, which means it's going to use the mechanical shutter. It's not going to use the electronic shutter. So I'm in an indoor light situation, so I have trouble with flicker under artificial lighting if I use electronic shutter. So I'm going to keep the silent photography off, which means it's going to use the mechanical shutter, and you'll also see that how it's going to take the picture. So if I say start, okay, so it took 50 pictures, 50 shots automatically all throughout the time. So now let's look at the sequence of 50 pictures, right? So so here is the last picture. So let's look from here. So you can see here my 5 and my number 5 is very, very sharp. Is really sharp. I can see all the way till the back on the top, which is the number 4, which is even behind the plane for 5, and even that is sharp, right? But all the rest of the image is actually not sharp, is out of focus. That's because this is the last one in the frame. So let's look at the first one in the frame. And as I move, and here is about the 25th shot, so this should be where the mammoth is in focus. Yep, yeah, you can see here the mammoth is in focus here. And then the very first shot, you should see you can see here that the Kleenex logo at the bottom left, this will be in focus. Okay, so we took 50 shots. Now you take this 50 shots, bring it into your computer, and then you have software like Photoshop that will take this, and then it will create a composite that's completely sharp from front to back. Okay, let's jump back to the presentation. So that's focus stacking. We're pretty much running out of time, so I'll just talk about this quickly. So multiple exposures is a concept of combining 2 or more shutter releases into a single JPEG file or RAW, but directly inside the camera. Now you've looked at pictures in Photoshop, and some of you are probably familiar with layers in Photoshop. So you can create layers, and then you can set the transparency of each layer or the opacity, and then you can create these nice composite images. Now you can do that in camera as well. And this is an evolution, a digital evolution of the film technique, where a photographer will take a picture but not advance the film before taking the next one. So they overlap the pictures one on top of each other. And the result is you get this dreamy, ethereal, surreal compositions that like will blend shapes and lights and everything. So there are a few blending modes. So let's quickly look at that as well. So if I go back to my camera here, I'm going to go to the menu, focus shift is off. Okay, so this multiple exposure unfortunately is not available on Sony cameras. For some reason they have not enabled this. So this is a feature for Nikon and Canon shooters. And the way you go is there is something called multiple exposure menu, and then you'll say, okay, do I want my exposure mode? I want to set it to on. You can either take a single photo or you take a series of pictures. I'm just going to go with single photo right now. So let's say I do this, and then I can pick how many pictures I want, how many number of shots, and then there is something called an overlay mode. This is the thing that you have to understand. So in the overlay mode, there are 4 things. So there is one called additive mode, then there's average, lighten, and darken. So in the additive mode, the camera simply adds the light from each shot. It just takes the it requires an underexposure for each frame, so it will avoid any blown out images. Average will actually automatically dim each shot based on the total number of frames. So if it will just take the light from if you're taking 2 pictures, it will just divide, it will add up everything and divides your light by 2. If you're taking 10 pictures, it will add up everything, divide by 10. That's the average. The lighten and darken, this only keeps the brightest or the darkest pixels from each layer. So if you say lighten, it will take only the lightest pictures from each picture. If you take darken, it will take the darker one from each layer. So I'm just going to show a quick thing of taking this, let's say add here. Okay. So let's take one picture, and I'm going to increase the f-stop a little bit, and then take that. Okay, all right. So here I have this image where I'm just taking a picture. So I took this picture, and immediately you can see that there is an icon on the top here that says there is some multiple exposure that it's expecting. So then I can bring in another object, and you can see I'm bringing in this object, but it's actually transparent here. Okay, so you can see here, and then I take a picture. So this is the picture, and then here is the multiple exposure here. So you can see, I don't know if it's a little bit dark, or it's bright. Okay, there you go. This is better. So you can, oh, sorry. The screen is a little bit dark, so I don't know. So if you can see, this is the picture without the doll. This is the picture with the doll in front, and this is my multiple exposure. So I could do this in Photoshop. I can take separate pictures and then I can do this in Photoshop, but then your camera is actually giving you this. You can, this opens up a whole box of creativity tools that you can do with this kind of features on your camera. Right, so this is multiple exposure. Now, quickly, the last topic I had was about filters. I'm going to talk about two filters. So the first one is actually what is called a circular polarizer filter. So the circular polarizer filter blocks specific waves of light, and where it helps is to remove reflection. So let's say I add a piece of glass here, and let me zoom in. Okay, oops, sorry. Okay, so you can see here I have a sunglass, and you can see that it's there. You can see it through. You can see the letters that are on the other side. It's reflecting the thing. So now I'm going to put on a circular polarizer. Let me show the demo and then I'll talk about it. Okay, so as I am turning the lens, you can see that the reflections go away. See that? And as I turn it back on, the reflections come back. As I keep turning, you can remove reflections. So you cannot see through the sunglass. Okay, if I keep turning, you can see the reflections come back. Right? So this is a circular polarizer. Let's go back to the presentation. This is my last topic. Okay, so a circular polarizer, it is a filter that blocks specific light waves that reflects off the surfaces. So its primary function is to remove reflections. It's a very, very useful filter for landscape photographers. It makes the foliage look much greener, the skies look much deeper blue. It eliminates glare from water, so you can actually take pictures of rocks underwater. It's a must-have for anyone in landscape photography. Right? The other filter is a neutral density filter. So neutral density filter is a filter that actually stops light. So this is it's like sunglasses for your lens, right? So if you have you wear sunglasses to protect your eyes and see better in the glare, ND filters do the same for the camera. So it reduces the light that is hitting the shutter speed, the shutter, I'm sorry. And the goal is to allow for longer shutter speeds or wider apertures in bright conditions. So if you want to change your waterfall in bright daylight to something silky smooth, you can use it. You can make it to smoothen the water. I have a couple of pictures here showing some applications that I did using the neutral density filter. There are other applications as well. So you can remove crowd. So let's say you're in a very crowded place where there's a lot of crowd moving, and you want to take a long exposure that's in a few minutes. You can make those moving people disappear. So you can use it for crowd removal as well. A lot of people who take cinematic video use neutral density filters because they want to hit specific frame rates. They keep their shutter speed at a specific rate, like 1/48th of a second or 1/20th of a second, and they want to be in that particular shutter speed, and so they use neutral density filters to help with that. Right. I actually have an example of a neutral density filter here, but I'm not sure if. Let's see if I stop sharing, and then if can you spotlight me, Priya? I'm done with my presentation, so let me just show you the.
Yes.
Okay, so this is a variable neutral density filter, and what it does is you can see, I don't know if you can, yeah, I can see it maybe this way. No, it's not cutting it out. I think it's not, no, you're not able to see it, but it does change the thing. Okay, zoom is actually cutting it out. Okay, zoom is too smart to show this, but this is a variable neutral density filter where I can dial in anywhere from 1 stop to 10 stops of light. So 1 stop means it will reduce the light by half, 2 stops by 4, and so on, right? So I can dial in, I can twist this, and then it will make the scene darker and darker and darker until I actually, yeah, you can you see that when I twist it, you can't see my collar. So if I twist it here, see it becomes darker. You can't see my collar anymore. But if I go back here, you can see the collar line. That's how it is. It makes it darker here. There you go. So, okay, I can take any questions if anyone has. Sorry, okay, so I have some questions in the chat. Let me take a look at it. So, for people who do not shoot in RAW, is JPEG really pure? Yeah, JPEG is not really pure, right? It is what the camera is doing some post-processing. At the end of the day, you have to convert digital pictures. You can't look at light signals, which is just ones and zeros. So the camera is doing some post-processing for you if you're not doing it yourself. So even in film days, most advanced film photographers used to do their own processing. They would take the film to the lab and spend time processing the film, including Ansel Adams, who used to take pictures of, nobody knows that, but Ansel Adams is a big post-processor in film days. Okay, what is a good HDR stitcher that you recommend? I use Lightroom, and I used to use Photoshop, but now the feature is in Lightroom, so I just use Lightroom for my HDR stitching. It's pretty decent. Photoshop is always there. They look more dull. Yes. Okay. Is that a Z6 II? No, this is Z6 I. This is the first Z6. So this camera I had pre-ordered when Nikon announced their first mirrorless camera. So this is Z6 I.
Praveen, if you could go to the focus bracketing and go to your slides. I just wanted to ask a question about the -1 EV, 0 EV, and the +1 EV. That the processed images already seem to be showing some differences. I was wondering why here. So you see the ones on the left, right, which are the raws, and then the processing is already lifting some shadows, or why are we processing it? Wouldn't you rather stitch it and then process the end raw? What is the workflow I'm missing here?
So this is just an illustration to show you if I process the picture as is without doing a HDR.
I see. So
This is
you would try to get a good photo without the HDR. This is how it would look. Is that
correct.
the intention? Okay.
Yeah, if you look at the second row, this is the standard 0 EV.
Yeah.
So I applied a set of processing steps to go from first column to the second column, and I
Okay.
applied the same same settings to the overexposed and the underexposed,
Yeah.
and this is what I get from
Yeah.
both of them.
Yeah.
Now, and then I did a HDR. So HDR took me to the last one,
Right.
and then I did, so the one on the right, I did do more than the same settings, but it helps me recover
I
a
no,
lot more.
I understand what you were trying to show. So basically, you were trying to show that, look, even if I process afterwards, the final image is better with this focus bracketed ones, right? So
With the focus
after I
bracketing,
merge ones. Okay,
with the
got it.
exposure bracketing, correct.
Yeah, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
One other small question. Now, in the focus stacking, is there an ability to set, like there is an ability to set where the camera focuses first. Now,
Yes.
is there an ability to set where the camera focuses last? Can it stop, or is it only the number of shots that determine where it goes?
Yeah, the number of shots and your step width will determine how far it goes. So you set it's like you set your start point,
Yeah.
and then you say, I want to start focusing little by little, and then how many you want. So
Yeah.
that's how you control the distance of how back it goes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a way in Nikon, for example, to say that I set that to the Kleenex, which is the furthest, or in the frontmost of that shot, right, in that table, and then I say just go to infinity afterwards. Is that possible?
Uh,
It will automatically stop if it reaches infinity, sir.
No,
Yeah,
that's what I wanted to know.
Yeah, it will
if it
automatically
reaches
stop.
infinity, it'll stop.
It'll
Yeah,
stop.
that is
Yes.
there. Yeah,
Yes, it'll
but
stop.
yeah. So if you set 300 pictures, but it reaches infinity by 250, it'll stop.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. That's all I had for today. Thanks everyone for stopping by and listening to the presentation.
Thank you, Praveen. These are topics, advanced topics. I hope a lot more people get a chance to view it on the YouTube or something and discover the true capabilities of digital cameras nowadays. In our last session, we showed what happens when you move away from auto into the program mode or the shutter priority mode or the aperture priority mode. Now Praveen has taken us further and shown us more features that are possible with your digital camera. As always, I want you to go ahead. Whoever it is, can you please?
Then we'll do that. I will tell you. Let's do that.
Pranav,
I will ask
Mani,
him.
please, can you go on mute?
Let's just meet. Morning hours coming now. We'll meet here. After the meeting will go.
Okay. So as always, we want you to go out and shoot and try all these modes for yourself and see how it adds to your art, right? So when Praveen was talking about this manual mode is transforming you into an artist, and that is essentially where we want you to be, right? So the auto mode is where the camera is doing all the thinking. But now that with all these sessions, you've understood the science behind these settings, you can then choose exactly what you want in that photograph and are able to dial in that art. Because when you look at a, a composition, you know what you want that picture to look like, and only by knowing these settings and how to manipulate them, you can get that picture. So go out there, experiment, and try it out for yourself, and happy shooting. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you,
Okay,
everyone.
2 weeks from now, we are going to have the last session in the series. This is going to be a long break for Sam, who actually got us started. He is going to be talking about creative, like what is composition, perspective, more of the art in the picture. I'm sure is going to wow us with different perspectives and how you can go further into not just the camera settings, but thinking about what that picture does, what it evokes in you. We're looking really forward to what Sam is going to have for us 2 weeks from now. Thank you so much.
Sorry, sir, just one question. May I know who is speaking?
This is Sridhar Bhuvaragwan, one of the
Okay.
instructors. I
Okay.
covered the session 3 and 4 in the
Okay,
middle.
sir. I have also taken some classes for IIT Madras Media Club some time ago.
Okay.
Just for nothing important. So Praveens class was very nice and interesting. So hopefully I'll join for the next one also.
Thank you, Ashok.
Thank you.